What up, man? It's your boy Street. About to do another Mr. Ballen reaction. I'm actually going to be on top of my game on this one because he just released this one earlier today. I hope to have it up by tomorrow. It's called Gruesome Crime Caught on Camera. And go ahead, leave a like, comment, subscribe, share. I don't give a damn. Just watch the video. That's cool too. Let's have fun. And let's see what Mr. Ballen has to say.
The next time you're out walking around the streets of London, look up.
Why?
Chances are good you will find a camera somewhere nearby.
Okay.
Because as of publishing this video right now, today, London is one of the most surveilled cities in the entire world, with citizens being filmed up to 70 times a day. Now, the reason for all of these cameras is to deter and more effectively prosecute criminal activity. But the vast majority of the footage these hundreds of thousands of cameras all over London capture every day is just normal people doing normal things.
Okay.
But periodically, these cameras will capture people doing just horrible, illegal things. And today, I'm going to tell you the story behind one of those types of videos.
Okay.
Now, at first glance, the video clip, which we're going to play, will not be that shocking. But trust me, with context, it's horrifying.
Okay.
But before we get into that story, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So, if that's of interest to you, in your will, please give the like button a treasure map that leads to a pot of gold. However, replace the gold with a $6 gift certificate to Blockbuster. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's story.
A $6 gift to fucking Blockbuster. Wow. Wow. Eye in the sky.
On the morning of Friday, June 11th, 2021, in a suburb in the northwest of London, a man named David Klein woke up to his early morning alarm. David rolled out of bed, he got dressed, and he very carefully made his way downstairs to start getting ready for work. As David moved around this old brick house he was in, he was very careful not to make much noise because he didn't want to wake up his roommate, a 67-year-old widow named Deborah Chong. Deborah was technically David's landlord, but she didn't charge him any rent. The two had met in church, and when Deborah had learned that David didn't really have a place to live, she had immediately volunteered her house and told David to come live with her for free. David couldn't believe her generosity and immediately took her up on the offer. And then after he had moved in, he learned that he was far from the first person who Deborah had allowed to come and live in her house rent-free.
Nice.
It would turn out Deborah, whose late husband had given her a ton of money in his will, felt like it was her responsibility and her duty to use her ample resources to house people that were kind of down on their luck. She said it was her way of serving God. Also, David got the impression that Deborah just liked having people living with her in her home. It made her happy. But David would notice a distinct change in Deborah's personality around the time the COVID-19 pandemic started in early 2020. At that time, Deborah, like many other people, was very concerned about this global health crisis and wanted to learn more about what was happening and what could happen in the future. And so the way she did that is she obsessively began going on YouTube and began consuming COVID-19 related content and political content surrounding COVID-19 and the pandemic and lockdowns. But instead of becoming more educated and well-versed on what was happening in the world, Deborah's constant consumption of COVID-19 related content on YouTube really just made her feel incredibly stressed out and anxious. And as David began to see firsthand, Deborah's sudden high levels of anxiety really began wreaking havoc on her life. Years earlier, Deborah was officially diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, which is a mental illness that causes bouts of psychosis, which is like losing touch with reality. Now, pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, her symptoms were so mild that she basically led a totally normal life. But once the pandemic started and her YouTube quest for information caused that spike in stress and anxiety, it caused a spike in her symptoms. And so she began suffering from frequent and lengthy hallucinations and delusions. One time, David came home from work, and when he went inside the house, he found Deborah sitting at the kitchen table, diligently writing these handwritten letters to various British public figures. And when David asked her what she was doing, she explained to him that these British public figures were speaking directly to her through the YouTube videos she was watching, and so these handwritten letters were her response letters back to these public figures. In May of 2021, Deborah's hallucinations had gotten so bad that doctors intervened and forcibly injected her with an antipsychotic medication.
Okay, so she was already crazy, and then the COVID-19 shit hit, and she went headfirst into that rabbit hole and became really crazier. She really thought officials were speaking to her through videos on the YouTube. God, I wish I was that crazy sometimes. It sounds fun.
And while these meds definitely reduced Deborah's symptoms, they also had some pretty negative side effects as well. Namely, they totally curbed her appetite and they made sleeping really challenging. And so pretty quickly, those two side effects combined made Deborah feel really weak and tired basically all the time, to the point where she sometimes needed David to literally hold her up by her arm just to walk down the street. Now, David, of course, had no problem helping Deborah with whatever she wanted. I mean, she had done so much for him, but David had work, and so he was only really available to help her in the mornings and in the evenings during the week. And so he had actually spoken to Deborah about hiring a full-time caretaker that could live with her and just take care of her at the level she needed all the time.
That was smart.
And Deborah was open to it. She actually called a company that offered that service, and they told her they would get someone out to her, but it would take some time before her caretaker was actually assigned to her. Now, David was really pleased with this development, but he really wished they would speed it up because, again, every time he was away all day at work, he knew Deborah was home by herself, and so he was just so worried something was going to happen to her when he was gone. So after David gathered up all of his things and very quietly made his way from the kitchen to the front door, he paused for a moment and said a silent prayer in his head for Deborah's safety and protection while he was away at work, and then he opened the front door, quietly went outside, shut the door behind him, and headed off to work.
Okay, who do you think the victim is? And who do you think the suspect is? I think David's going to be the victim. And I think Deborah, Miss Chong, is going to be the suspect. That's just how I feel this story is going to play out. But no, Mr. Ballen, it's going to be the cat around the corner who hangs up with the like button.
A few hours later, David came home from work. He went back inside of the house, and the first thing he did is he called out for Deborah. But Deborah didn't call back, and the house was very quiet. And so David took off his shoes and walked around the first floor, kind of calling out for Deborah as he walked. But again, there was no answer. And so after walking the whole first floor and not finding her, he yelled one more time really loudly, "Hey, Deborah, are you here?" And after hearing nothing, he pulled out his phone and he called Deborah. And as the phone was ringing, he could hear Deborah's phone ringing upstairs. And so he thought, okay, maybe Deborah is upstairs, she fell asleep, and her phone's just next to her on the bed. And so with David's phone still calling Deborah's phone, David began walking upstairs. And when he got to the top of the stairs, he just followed the sound of Deborah's ringing phone into her bedroom. And when he went in there, Deborah was not in there. Her phone was, though, and so were her glasses. They were both just sitting on the bed. Those were two items that Deborah would bring with her anywhere she went. And so, trying not to panic, David called out a few more times for Deborah, but again, there was no answer. And so after quickly searching her bedroom and not finding her, he searched all the other rooms upstairs, but again, she just was not there. She was not in the house. And so David began calling and texting friends from church and other people that knew Deborah to see if anybody had heard from her or knew where she was. But no one did, and the only people who had recently talked to her said she was totally incoherent, talking about spirits and demons and the destruction of all mankind. And so, believing Deborah must be suffering from a schizophrenic hallucination somewhere out in the city, David picked up his phone again and he called the police. When the police showed up at the house, David filled them in on what was going on, and the police told him, hey, look, we'll go back and review all of the CCTV camera footage taken from outside of your house. We're bound to see footage of Deborah leaving her house at some point, and then we can just watch where she goes. And so David felt reassured, and the police felt very confident. But when the police went back to the station and began reviewing all of this security footage taken from roughly outside of Deborah's house, there was no footage of her ever leaving the house. There was only footage the day before of Deborah going into the house, but she never left. And so naturally, the police went back to Deborah and David's house, and they thoroughly searched that house, believing Deborah had to be in there somewhere. But despite searching everywhere in this house, in every crawl space, in the attic, the basement, every closet, everywhere, she wasn't there. It would take the police nearly a month, but they would eventually figure out where Deborah went.
She in the garden? Oh, is she in the garden? So I don't think Deborah's the suspect. I think she's going to be the victim. Is she in the garden? Oh, no, don't let her be in the garden. No, 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 no. We've already heard that story.
And to say they were surprised at where she went is
a
massive understatement. But to understand what happened, we have to go back to the very beginning of Deborah's very strange disappearance story.
Let's do it.
Last weekend, I looked over and I saw old Seagull Lung sitting at his miniature 1999 era G3 iMac, and I couldn't help but notice he was looking a little downtrodden. And when I saw what he was doing on his iMac, I knew why. He was hitting refresh over and over and over again on his MySpace page, and it wasn't changing the numbers. Old Lung hasn't had a view on his MySpace page since 2010. To cheer him up, I decided I would purchase a MySpace view bot and flood his page with tens of views. So I ran over to my windmill-powered laptop and began slapping away at the keys to navigate to an online vendor that sold MySpace view bots. However, as soon as I clicked on the link, this website is a virus, not an online vendor for MySpaceViewbots.com, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. Unbelievably, that website was riddled with malware, and so immediately my windmill-powered laptop caught on fire and then exploded, sending shrapnel raining down on me. Luckily, old Lung was in the other room, and he heard the commotion, and he leapt into the room, and he pushed me out of the way just in time. And then after the dust had settled, old Lung gave me a big hug, and then slapped me right in the anti-tragus and said, Papa, wenn du ständig auf gefährliche Webseiten klickst, dann brauchst du NordVPN. Which of course in German means, Papa, if you're going to keep clicking on dangerous websites, then use NordVPN. And boy was old Lungy right. A VPN, or virtual private network, is a service that keeps you safe when you browse the internet. And NordVPN is the brand name in the VPN space. Not only will NordVPN keep your data safely behind their wall of next-generation encryption, but also, most importantly, they will block malware hosting websites and annoying pop-up ads and botnet control. So, if your online shopping seems to always turn into explosions and other various catastrophes caused by malware-hosted websites, then you need to take old Lungy's advice too and sign up for NordVPN today. Right now, you can sign up for a 2-year plan at a huge discount, plus get 4 additional months for free when you go to nordvpn.com/Mr. Ballen. And it's risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. That's nordvpn.com/Mr. Ballen, or click the link in the description below. Okay, back to the story.
His plugs are the best. I love his plugs. He gets so animated.
It all started about 10 months before Deborah actually went missing in August of 2020. That month, Deborah met a 36-year-old woman named Gemma Mitchell at one of her church prayer groups. Like Deborah, Gemma was very religious, and so the two women became fast friends despite being 30 years apart in age. Deborah would confide in Gemma about her mental health struggles, and Gemma would confide in Deborah about her house/financial troubles. Basically, Gemma, a couple years earlier, had given money to a contractor to fix up her house, but the contractor had taken her money, not done any work, and then
Bitch
run
ass
off, basically
motherfucker.
robbing Gemma. But Gemma really needed to do these renovations, and so she wound up hiring a second contractor who did begin work, but during this process, Gemma realized she would never be able to recover the money that was stolen from her from the first contractor, and so when she realized she wasn't going to get that money, she knew she would not be able to fully pay the second contractor for his work. And so when the second contractor found out he was not going to get paid, he stopped work immediately, despite the fact that there was no working heat in Gemma's house and there was a huge hole in her roof. But Gemma had no way to fix this, and so she and her mom were just living in this house that was just totally freezing all the time. Deborah had been so moved by Gemma's situation that very quickly after meeting her, she offered £200,000 to Gemma to finish the renovations on her house, under the condition that one room in Gemma's new house would be solely dedicated to Christian ministry. Gemma was overwhelmed with gratitude. She could not believe that Deborah was willing to do this for her. And so, of course, she agreed to her terms without any hesitation. After that, the two women began texting all the time about this renovation project. Deborah would suggest paint colors and different things to do with the inside of the house, and Gemma would text updates about the different contractors she had talked to who could do pieces of the renovation. Deborah was always inviting Gemma over to her house, and she even began referring to Gemma as her sister. And Gemma loved it because Gemma actually had always wanted to be much closer with her own biological sister, but they had kind of drifted apart. And so for Gemma, Deborah really did feel like the sister she was supposed to have.
So it's not David. Now it feels like it could be Gemma, but it may not be Gemma. It could be Gemma's mom. They haven't mentioned her at all, except for the fact that she lived with Gemma in the house that was all fucked up. Mr. Ballen, Mr. Ballen, Mr. Ballen. Why your story's gotta be so like... I'm gonna go with Gemma's mom right now. I'm calling it right now. Gemma's mom.
But their relationship was about to change drastically. In May of 2021, so 8 months after the two women met for the first time, and 1 month before Deborah would vanish, Deborah was forcibly injected with that antipsychotic medication in order to combat her paranoid schizophrenia. And right after Deborah got this injection, she began treating Gemma totally differently. She basically stopped communicating altogether with Gemma, and then in the rare times she would text Gemma, it was just to berate her about being a hoarder or being too messy and sloppy. Gemma didn't really know what to make of her friend's new behavior, but she knew, Deborah was going through a really tough time, and so Gemma just kind of took the abuse and didn't say anything. When Gemma did try to talk to Deborah by asking about the renovation project, which was quickly approaching on the horizon, Deborah would tell Gemma not to talk about it, that it was too stressful and just don't bring it up again. And then one day, Deborah just called Gemma out of the blue and said, "I'm not funding the renovation anymore, it's over, you're on your own." Gemma felt totally devastated and pleaded with Deborah to please reconsider. But Deborah was not about to change her mind, and in fact, on this call, she would tell Gemma, hey, you should just sell your house. And in fact, until you sell your house, don't contact me. And then Deborah hung up. Gemma didn't know what to do. She felt like she really could not sell her house because it was kind of like a family heirloom that had been passed down for generations, and so it just felt wrong to sell it. But on the other hand, without help, she would never have enough money to fix the house up. And so she was totally stuck, and she felt like her only option was to go to Deborah and have one more conversation and just really plead her case and see if maybe there was some chance Deborah would change her mind. So, on the morning of June 11th, 2021, so this is the day that Deborah goes missing, Gemma showed up on Deborah's porch and rang her doorbell. She arrived just after David had left for work. A few moments later, Deborah slowly made her way to the door. She opened it up. She saw Gemma out there and asked, what's going on? And Gemma just very politely said, "Would you please let me come in? And can we just talk one more time about the renovation?" And Deborah, who was not very enthused at the idea of having this conversation, conversation, said, you know what? Okay, come on in. And so Gemma would go inside and the two women would go sit down and they'd exchange some pleasantries. And then at some point when there was a break in the conversation, Gemma brought up the renovation. She had actually written out this whole speech about how incredible Deborah was and how these renovations, if they went through with them, would mean so much to her, Gemma, and her family. But as Gemma is going through this pitch, Deborah just cuts her off and says, Gemma, I'm sorry, but my decision is final. I am not paying for the renovation. I'm sorry. A little while later, both Gemma and Deborah would leave Deborah's house. And there actually is CCTV footage that shows the pair walking on Deborah's street right outside of her house. However, the reason the police did not flag this footage when they first were scanning all of that footage to figure out where Deborah went is because when you watch the footage of the two women together, it actually only looks like one person. It looks like Gemma. But Gemma is wheeling a huge suitcase right behind her, and as it would turn out, Deborah was inside of it. It's assumed that after Deborah was forcibly given that antipsychotic medication for her paranoid schizophrenia, that it really leveled her out. She was suddenly thinking very clearly for the first time in months. And in this clear state of mind, it's believed she realized the 200,000-pound gift she was giving to Gemma, someone she barely knew, was a bad decision. And so she just wanted to back out of it. And so, back inside of Deborah's house, when Deborah and Gemma are sitting there, and Gemma is doing her speech to try to convince Deborah to change her mind, and Deborah is saying, no, my final answer is no, it's over, that's when Gemma snapped. She grabbed a blunt object, we don't know what it was, and she smashed Deborah right over the skull and fractured her skull, causing Deborah to fall unconscious and slump onto the floor. And then Gemma leapt on top of Deborah's unconscious body. Gemma pulled out a knife and cut Deborah's head off. And then afterward, Gemma cleaned up all the blood in the house and then stuffed Deborah's body and head into that big suitcase. And then after Gemma stole several legal documents and a copy of Deborah's will, she walked out of Deborah's house with Deborah in the suitcase behind her. Gemma would walk with Deborah all the way back to her house, and then she would leave the suitcase, with Deborah still inside of it, in her backyard. She would just leave it there for 2 weeks, and then after those 2 weeks, Gemma would take the suitcase again, still with Deborah's body inside of it, and transport it 250 miles away to a seaside town where she would dump it. And in that seaside town, some vacationers would discover Deborah's body and call it in to the police. On July 6th, 2021, police would arrest Gemma on suspicion of murder. When they arrested her, they showed up at her house and used a battering ram to smash in her front door. And then when the door finally literally smashed open, Gemma was just standing there waiting for the police, as if she knew this was going to happen and she's just waiting to be taken away. When the police would actually go into Deborah's house and search it, they would find a fake copy of Deborah's will where all of Deborah's estate was handed over to Gemma and Gemma's mother. In October of 2022, Gemma was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years. To this day, Gemma insists she did not kill Deborah.
You a lying
so,
bitch.
That's gonna do it. If you got something out
you
of
a
this
lying
episode,
bitch. You know it.
Already,
you damn well know it. You damn well you a lying bitch. I didn't do it. All right, OJ, shut up. So I was wrong. It wasn't an exorcism from Gemma. Well, it kind of was. She exorcised some demons. It was Gemma's mom, who I thought it might be. She wasn't in the garden. She kind of was, but kind of wasn't. She was in the backyard in a suitcase. And it wasn't David. Man, I feel bad for David, dude. Like, what's going to happen with David now? Huh? Shit. What's going to happen with David? I got to know what's going to happen with David. It's crazy, man. Greed will make you do some stupid shit. Make you do something you would never thought you would do. Just be careful who you bring into your life, man. Be careful who you Careful who you bring into your life, and be careful. Be very, very careful who you divulge financial information to, because you never know who you might trust, who you think you could trust is going to stab you in the back, literally or figuratively. Y'all be good, man. Leave a comment, leave a like, leave a subscribe, share it, or just enjoy the video. Peace.